The air in Grandma Margaret's living room was thick enough to chew, a suffocating blend of old potpourri and barely concealed avarice. I stood by the grand, drafty window, feeling like a ghost at my own family's wake. My name is Sophia, and at 31, I'd spent most of my life being the family's overlooked wallpaper. Today felt like the grand finale of that particular performance. Uncle Norman, Grandma's eldest son, was already holding court by the fireplace, his booming voice cutting through the hushed whispers. He was 54, and his default setting was domineering. Aunt Helen, 49, sat primly on the antique sofa, her eyes darting between her two daughters, Layla, 26, and Annalise, 22. Layla, my perpetually competitive cousin, kept shooting me glances, probably trying to gauge if my plain black dress meant I was finally admitting defeat in the unspoken family hierarchy. Annalise, quieter, just fiddled with her phone. Norman's daughter, Selah, 29, was huddled with Layla, a picture of entitled ambition. Then my brother Jacob walked in, 28 years old and radiating that familiar golden child glow. He gave me a perfunctory nod, already anticipating his moment in the sun. Tyron Wheeler, the family lawyer, a smooth 41-year-old with a perpetually sympathetic expression, cleared his throat. The will reading began. The usual preamble, then the specifics. Jacob got the house, the one Grandma had lived in for 50 years, valued at a cool $60,000. Relief, then smug satisfaction, spread across his face. Helen and her daughters started bickering immediately over who got which piece of antique jewelry and furniture. Norman just nodded, already seeing himself as the patriarch of this newly divided kingdom. Finally, Tyron looked at me, and to Sophia, a box. A battered cardboard box taped shut, labeled simply, for her. I took it, the silence in the room suddenly deafening. I opened it. Inside were a few moth-eaten sweaters, a couple of half-burnt candles, and a single yellowed note. My grandmother's familiar scrawl. She never amounted to much. A snicker from Layla, a pitying glance from Helen. Jacob just shrugged a silent "told you so." My face remained impassive, but inside something cold and hard crystallized. They thought this was the end of my story. They had no idea it was just the prologue. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Avery, my childhood friend and confidant. "Ready?" I typed back, my fingers steady. Yes, they have no idea. The sting of Grandma's note, she never amounted to much, still burned, but it was quickly being overshadowed by a different kind of heat, a cold, calculated fury. They thought they knew me, the quiet, bookish Sophia who always faded into the background. They thought I was still that girl, dismissed and underestimated. They had no idea. For years, while they were busy bickering over imaginary inheritances and critiquing my life choices, I was building something. My family saw me as the one who never quite fit in, the one who chose a laptop over family gatherings. "Still playing with computers, Sophia?" Uncle Norman would scoff, back when I was in my early 20s, just starting out. "Dreamers die broke, kid." Aunt Helen would just eye me dismissively, clearly wondering why I wasn't married with kids like a normal person. They never asked about my work, never cared, so I stopped telling them. My startup, a niche AI-driven analytics platform, became my secret world. I poured every ounce of my quiet determination into it. While they were celebrating Jacob's promotions at his corporate job, I was pulling all-nighters, coding, pitching, and growing. They saw my worn jeans and quiet demeanor and assumed I was struggling. They never saw the late-night calls with investors, the intricate contracts, or the relentless grind that was slowly but surely turning my quiet ambition into something formidable. Just last week, the final papers were signed. The acquisition was complete. My company, the one they never knew existed, sold for $4.2 million. The funds had just cleared my account that morning, hours before the will reading. "Make them eat their words, Soph," Avery had texted earlier, knowing the will reading was today. She was the only one who truly understood, the only one who had believed in me from day one. She'd been my sounding board, my late-night coffee supplier, and my fiercest cheerleader. And now, as I stood there, the weight of Grandma's dismissive note in my hand, I knew exactly what I was going to do. This wasn't about pride or showing off. This was precise, surgical retribution. The funeral, set for next week, would be the perfect stage. I pulled out my phone, ignoring the family still squabbling over a porcelain doll. First, a stretch limo, not for comfort, but for effect. Then, a quick call to a private land surveyor. Yes, for a future project, I told the receptionist, a small, grim smile playing on my lips. Very precise work required. The funeral day dawned crisp and grey, a fitting backdrop for the performance I was about to stage. I'd spent the week since the will reading in a quiet hum of activity, solidifying my plans. My outfit was simple but impactful, a sleek, custom-tailored black gown, understated but undeniably expensive. No flashy jewelry, just a quiet confidence that was a new accessory for me. The stretch limo pulled up to the church, long and gleaming, a stark contrast to the usual collection of sedans and SUVs that made up our family's fleet. Heads turned, murmurs rippled through the small crowd of mourners already gathered. I stepped out, feeling every eye on me, and for the first time, it wasn't a feeling of being judged, but of being observed. Uncle Norman, the man who'd once dismissed me with "dreamers die broke," was suddenly at my side, practically bowing. "Sophia, my dear, so good of you to come. Can I get you some coffee? A seat, perhaps?" His voice, usually so booming and dismissive, was now dripping with an obsequious sweetness that was almost comical. He probably thought I'd married rich. The irony was a bitter, satisfying taste on my tongue. Jacob, ever the golden child, tried to save face. He sauntered over, a forced smile on his face. "Wow, Sophia, big entrance. Who's the sugar daddy?" he whispered, trying to make it sound like a friendly joke, but the sneer in his eyes was unmistakable. "No sugar daddy, Jacob," I replied, my voice calm, almost bored. "Just a very good year for investments." I didn't elaborate, didn't need to. Let them speculate. Let them tie themselves in knots trying to figure it out. Layla and Sella were already huddled, whispering furiously, their eyes darting between me and the limo. I heard snippets. "Must be a tech millionaire, and did she win the lottery?" I moved through the reception line, accepting condolences, my composure unwavering. I could feel the shift in the room, the palpable curiosity. The quiet, overlooked Sophia was gone. In her place was someone new, someone they couldn't quite place. As I was about to leave, Tyron, the family lawyer, approached me, his smooth demeanor replaced by a subtle urgency. "Sophia, a moment?" he asked, drawing me aside into a quiet alcove. "About your grandmother's will. Not all assets were accounted for, you know. There were some peculiarities." His gaze was knowing, hinting at secrets I hadn't even considered. Tyron's words about unaccounted assets echoed in my mind long after the funeral reception ended. "Peculiarities," he'd said. It added another layer to the bitter taste of Grandma Margaret's note, making me wonder if her dismissal was just part of a larger, more calculated slight. My grandmother had always been a complicated woman. I remembered snippets of kindness from my childhood, her teaching me to bake her famous lemon bars, the way she'd let me read for hours in her sun-drenched study. But those moments were always overshadowed by her sharp tongue, her constant comparisons, and her thinly veiled disappointment in me. "Why can't you be more like Jacob?" was a frequent refrain, even when we were kids. Or, "Layla is so much better at sports, Sophia. Maybe try something else." I recalled one particularly vivid memory from when I was about 15. I was visiting Grandma Margaret's house during a school break, curled up with a book in the living room, trying to be invisible. The door to her study was slightly ajar, and I heard voices, Uncle Norman's booming tones, Aunt Helen's sly whispers, and Grandma's own distinct, authoritative voice. They were discussing the will. Jacob, of course, gets the house, Grandma had declared, her voice firm. He's the future of the family. And the jewelry, Mother, Helen had chimed in. Layla would simply adore the sapphire brooch. Annalise would look stunning in the pearls. Norman had grumbled about needing more liquid assets, something about securing the legacy. My name hadn't come up once, not a single mention. It wasn't just that I wasn't getting anything significant, it was that I wasn't even part of the conversation. I was invisible, already written out of their plans. The memory coupled with Tyron's hint solidified something in me. My fury, which had been simmering since the will reading, now began to harden into a cold, precise resolve. They wanted to play games with inheritances and legacies? Fine. I had resources now, resources they couldn't even fathom, and I knew exactly how to use them to legally inconvenience Jacob, Helen, and Norman. The house Jacob inherited was Grandma's pride and joy, her kingdom, and every kingdom has its borders. I pulled out my phone, opening my contacts. I had a lawyer on retainer now, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who handled property law. I need you to quietly make some inquiries, I told her, my voice calm, about properties adjoining my brother Jacob's new house, specifically the one directly next door. Weeks later, I returned to town. The initial shock and curiosity from the funeral had faded, replaced by the usual family gossip, which I was conveniently out of earshot of. My lawyer had done her work efficiently. The house next door to Grandma's, now Jacob's, had been on the market for a while. A charming but slightly neglected bungalow. It was perfect. I bought it, paying in cash. The real estate agent barely blinked, clearly used to the quiet, swift transactions of the truly wealthy. The ink was barely dry on the papers before I had a survey team out there. The same team I'd booked right after the will reading. They were meticulous, professional, and discreet. Word travels fast in small towns, especially when a stretched limo-riding relative suddenly buys the house next door and starts having land surveyed. Neighbours, who had probably known Grandma Margaret for decades, gossiped openly as the surveyors meticulously redrew the property line. It turned out the old fence line, the one everyone had always assumed marked the boundary, was off by a good 6 feet. 6 feet of Jacob's beloved, newly inherited garden legally shifted onto my land. Jacob, predictably, went ballistic. I heard about it from Avery, who had a knack for picking up on family drama even from a distance. He'd called Uncle Norman in a rage, claiming I was trying to steal his property. Norman, true to form, had tried to bluster his way through it, but my lawyer had already sent them certified letters with the new, legally binding survey results. There was no legal recourse. The line was the line. The family group chat, a cesspool of passive aggression on a good day, exploded. Helen and Layla were particularly venomous, speculating wildly about my sudden wealth and accusing me of being spiteful. I just muted the chat. Let them stew. That Saturday, I hosted a small wine party at my new house. I invited a few of the neighbours, the ones who had watched the surveyors with knowing smiles, and a couple of old friends from high school who weren't connected to the family drama. The atmosphere was relaxed, convivial. I made sure to send out the invitations by mail, not email, and certainly not through the family grapevine. Jacob, Norman, Helen, Layla, Annalise, and Sella were, of course, conspicuously absent. Their exclusion was the point. The next morning, a thick envelope appeared in my mailbox, unsigned. The paper was heavy, expensive, and the handwriting was elegant, almost artistic. But the words were anything but. You think you're clever, Sophia. You think you've won. This isn't over. You'll regret this. It contained details only someone intimately familiar with the family and my recent movements could possibly know. The threatening letter with its elegant script and venomous undertones didn't surprise me. It confirmed what I already knew. My family was escalating. The next few weeks proved it. False rumors started circulating about me, that I was involved in shady dealings, that my money came from illicit sources. There was even minor vandalism at my new property. a broken garden gnome, a few trampled flowers. Petty, but irritating. But I had anticipated their pettiness, and I was ready to return it with interest. My revenge wasn't about public brawls or shouting matches. It was about precision, about using their own weaknesses against them. First, Uncle Norman. His aggressive protection of the family's legacy often skirted the edges of legality, especially when it came to his business dealings. An anonymous tip to the right tax authority, backed by carefully curated, publicly available information about his various shell corporations, was all it took. Nothing illegal on my part, just pointing out discrepancies that an auditor might find interesting. Then, a few strategic leaks to a local society gossip column about his questionable ethics in a recent charity drive. Norman prided himself on his social standing. A little public embarrassment would sting more than any financial blow. Then Layla. Her ambition was her Achilles heel. I discovered she'd been padding her resume, taking credit for projects she'd barely touched at her marketing firm. An anonymous email sent from a burner account to a few key figures in her industry, including her direct competitor, detailing her fabrications. It wasn't enough to get her fired, but it certainly humiliated her at the office and put a permanent stain on her professional reputation. "Sophia, are you sure about this?" Avery asked me one evening over video call, her brow furrowed. "You're becoming as petty as they are." I looked at my reflection in the dark screen. She was right. The satisfaction I felt was laced with a grim acknowledgement of how far I was willing to go. "Maybe," I admitted, my voice flat. "But they started it, and I'm just finishing it." The bitterness of Grandma's note, the years of dismissal, fueled me. I pressed on. The next day my phone rang. It was Tyron, the family lawyer. His voice was hushed, almost conspiratorial. "Sophia, I've been doing some digging, as per our last conversation, about that box your grandmother left you, the one with the note." My heart gave a strange lurch. "Yes, I think there was more to it than just old sweaters," he said. "I found a reference in some of her old papers, a hidden compartment, and a key. Your grandmother, she may have meant for you to find something else entirely." Tyron's words about a hidden key and a secret compartment sent a jolt through me. I rushed back to my old apartment, where the infamous cardboard box still sat in a corner, untouched since the will reading. I tore through the moth-eaten sweaters, ran my fingers along the bottom, and there it was, a false bottom, cleverly concealed. Beneath it, nestled in a velvet pouch, was a small, ornate key. The key led me to a safety deposit box at a bank I hadn't known Grandma used. Inside, there was no money, no hidden fortune. Instead, there was a stack of letters. Most were addressed to various family members, but one on top was addressed simply, "To Sophia." I read mine first. It was brief, written in Grandma's familiar hand, but the tone was different. It spoke of regret, of a life lived under the thumb of others' expectations, and a cryptic apology for the burdens I placed upon you. It wasn't an apology for the will, not directly, but for something deeper, something about my quiet nature being misinterpreted. The other letters, however, were explosive. They detailed Norman's elaborate schemes to hide assets and dodge taxes, revealing his financial misdeeds with stark clarity. There were also letters from Helen, full of manipulative requests to Grandma, outlining her plans to secure more for her daughters, even at the expense of others. It was a roadmap of their greed and hypocrisy, laid bare. I didn't hesitate. Anonymously, of course, I forwarded the relevant letters to the authorities, the tax department for Norman, and a few choice rivals and local gossip columnists for Helen. The fallout was swift and brutal. Within days, rumors turned into investigations. Norman's accounts were frozen, his reputation in tatters. Helen's social standing, which she so desperately clung to, crumbled under the weight of public humiliation and professional repercussions for Layla. The family group chat, once a place for their venom, became a chaotic mess of accusations and panic. The final family gathering was ostensibly to discuss Grandma's memorial, but it quickly devolved into a public showdown. Jacob, looking pale and defeated, was being grilled by Norman about the house and the property line. Helen was openly weeping, her carefully constructed facade shattered. Layla and Sella were screaming at each other, blaming each other for their own misfortunes. I stood quietly in the doorway, watching the chaos I had orchestrated. When the room finally fell silent, exhausted by their own vitriol, I stepped forward. "You wanted to know what I amounted to," I said, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the heavy air. "You wanted to know who the sugar daddy was, Jacob. The truth is, I built my own fortune, while you were all too busy tearing each other down and plotting over scraps. You dismissed me, you mocked me, and you tried to erase me. But karma, it turns out, has a very long memory." I saw the dawning horror in their eyes as they finally connected the dots. The limo, the house, the anonymous tips. I had done this, all of it. I had served them their own cruelty, cold. I turned and walked out, leaving them in the ruins of their own making. The silence behind me was profound. The silence I left behind at that family gathering was the loudest thing I'd ever orchestrated. In the days and weeks that followed, the fractures I'd exposed became gaping chasms. Norman's legal troubles spiraled. His business was under intense scrutiny, and his social circle, once so vital to him, had evaporated. Helen and Layla found themselves ostracized, their carefully constructed lives crumbling under the weight of scandal and public humiliation. Annalise, the quieter one, seemed to disappear from the family radar entirely, probably trying to distance herself from the wreckage. Jacob, stripped of his golden child status and with the legal headache of his newly shrunken garden, eventually sold Grandma's house, at a significant loss, I heard, and moved out of town. The prized inheritance had become a poisoned chalice. I had won. Every single one of them had faced their comeuppance, tailored precisely to their particular brand of cruelty. The satisfaction was undeniable, a cold, hard triumph. But as the dust settled, a strange emptiness began to creep in. The constant hum of planning, the sharp focus of my vendetta, had given me a purpose. Now, with it gone, I was left with a quiet house and a profound sense of isolation. I had severed the final, fragile threads of connection, even the toxic ones. My victories had brought me little warmth. "So, Italy?" Avery's voice was a welcome balm over the phone. "I've been looking at flights. We could do Florence, then maybe a week in Tuscany. Get lost in some vineyards. Forget all this." She'd been my rock through it all, the only person who truly knew the depths of my quiet fury and the extent of my success. She offered a new start, a different kind of future. Before I left, I drove to the cemetery. Grandma Margaret's headstone was stark against the grey sky. I stood there for a long time, the old note, "She never amounted to much," replaying in my mind. The hidden key, the letters, the truth they revealed. It wasn't about her forgiveness, not anymore. It was about mine, forgiving myself for letting their words define me for so long, forgiving myself for the bitterness that had taken root. I wasn't forgiving them, not yet, maybe not ever. But I was letting go of the need for their approval, their recognition. That was the real victory. I turned and walked away, leaving the past behind.